available on, there we go. Those previous 2 events were recorded and are available on our Whatcom Win, that's Whatcom, WIN.org website if you'd like to review those. We're going to have two presentations tonight. Kelley Turner with Lummi Nation and Treva with the Nooksack Tribe are going to start. They're going to present together. We'll have time for questions after their presentation, and then we're going to turn it over to Analiese with the City of Bellingham, and we're going to have a little bit of time after her presentation, and if everything goes well, we'll have just a few minutes at the very end for final questions. So you can ask your questions in one of 2 ways. You can either plop your question into the chat, which is totally fine, and you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to do that, or you can raise your hand and ask your question verbally. And to raise your hand, you would hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen and look for the raise hand icon. Similarly, that's where you're going to find the chat icon. I personally always find it more pleasant to see people's faces when I present. So if you are comfortable leaving your camera on, that would be nice for our presenters. But however, if you're eating your dinner right now and would like to have your camera off, we understand that as well. All right, so now at this point, I would love to introduce Kelley Turner and Treva. Kelley Turner is the Watershed Restoration Manager for the Lummi Nation Natural Resources Department. Kelley has a Master's of Science degree in Freshwater Ecology from Western Washington University and a dual Bachelor of Science and Bachelor's of Art degree from the Evergreen State College with an emphasis in field biology and ecology. She has over 20 years of experience in estuarine, freshwater, and restoration ecology. Prior to joining Lummi Nation in 2018, she worked in both the private and public sectors. As a restoration biologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, she designed and implemented restoration monitoring programs for the Stillaguamish and Nisqually estuaries and for North San Francisco Bay. Treva is the Assistant Natural Resources Director and Habitat Program Manager for the Nooksack Tribe Natural Resources Department. Treva earned a Master's of Science in Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences from the University of Washington and a BS in Biology with a marine concentration from UCLA. She studied kelp forest ecology in California, krill in Antarctica, and juvenile salmon in the Queets River on the Olympic Peninsula before taking a job with the Nooksack Tribe in 1999. She largely focuses on salmon recovery planning, monitoring, and adaptive management, and managing the tribe's habitat restoration program. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Okay, we ready to get started?
Ready.
Indeed.
Wonderful, thanks. Hello everyone, my name's Kelley Turner. I work for Lummi Nation, and joining me is Treva with the Nooksack Tribe. We're happy to be here today to co-present on how climate change will impact our salmon and what our 2 tribes are doing to mitigate these impacts. We want to start off by saying that we are presenting on behalf of our respective tribes' natural resources programs and the many, many staff who support these programs. We will be presenting on salmon in the Nooksack Watershed, future climate impacts to salmon, and our restoration and adaptation efforts. The Nooksack River is home to 9 salmonid species, 3 of which are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act: Puget Sound Chinook, Puget Sound steelhead, and bull trout. In the Nooksack Basin, we have 2 independent Chinook populations, the North Fork, Middle Fork population, and the South Fork Nooksack Early Chinook. Recovery goals for adult abundances for each population are shown here in blue. We have the North Fork, Middle Fork on the left and the South Fork on the right. Both of these populations are essential for the recovery of Puget Sound Chinook, and yet both are in peril. The red bars show the 5-year average natural origin escapement for each population. You can see that we have a long way to go to recover these fish. Habitat degradation is the leading cause of the decline of Nooksack salmonid populations. Habitat degradation has been attributed to the loss of mature forested floodplain and riparian areas, removal of existing log jams and in-stream wood, loss of forested canopies in the upper watershed, levee and bank armoring, channel modifications such as straightening the channel, and altered hydraulic regimes from water withdrawals and changes in the land cover. And this photo we have here is of a large natural log jam spanning across the South Fork Nooksack River in 1920 near the Nesset Farm. And you can see two people standing in the middle of the jam, and large log jams like this were once abundant on the Nooksack River forks.
So climate change will exacerbate these legacy and ongoing land use impacts to salmon in several ways. In the next few slides, I'll provide an overview of some of the major future climate impacts that will affect salmon. Much of what I shall present comes from work that the Nooksack Tribe funded by several of Bob Mitchell's graduate students at Western Washington University, as well as a salmon vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning effort that we led for the South Fork Nooksack River. I'll start with shifts in hydrology. This graphic shows how the annual pattern of stream flows in the Nooksack River at Ferndale are expected to shift in the future. The x-axis here shows the months of the year from October through to September, and the y-axis shows average monthly flows. The blue line shows the historic pattern, which included two peaks, one in the fall associated with storm events, and then another in the spring due to snowmelt. The red dashed line shows the pattern expected by mid-century, which shows a shift to a higher peak peaking in January and lower flows in the spring and summer. Focusing a little more on the peak flows, a declining snowpack and higher intensity of precipitation events will lead to an increase in the magnitude of flood events. This graph shows the modeled change in the magnitude of the 10-year recurrence interval flood for 4 locations in the upper watershed, upper Nooksack River watershed, the main stem near Nugent's Corner, the North Fork near Glacier, the Middle Fork upstream of the Mosquito Lake Road Bridge, and the South Fork at Saxon Road Bridge. Relative to the 1990s, modeling indicates that the moderate size, the 10-year flood, will increase in magnitude from 22% in the South Fork up to 48% in the North Fork by the 2050s. Looking further out to the 2080s, we expect to see greater increases in magnitude. Now, the frequency of events of a given size will also increase. So what was a 10-year flood in the main stem in the 1990s is it's projected to reoccur over 3 times more frequently by the 2050s and almost 4 times more frequently by the 2080s. In addition to peak flows, we also expect changes in low flows. Declining snowpack, earlier snowmelt, and glacier retreat will result in lower stream flows during the summer months. This is another graph that shows projected changes in the median September stream flows for those same 4 locations, the main stem in each of the forks. You can see the projected decrease is most pronounced for the South Fork, which is a rain and snowmelt dominated system. The North and Middle Forks are glacial, are supported by glaciers, or glacial systems. And the impacts, at least in the first part of the century, are going to be a little less because there'll be increased glacial melt that are sort of buffering those stream flows. That will taper off in the latter part of the century as that glacial ice volume decreases, leading to more significant reductions in September flows through all these systems by the latter part of the century. The problem of low flows in summer, especially in the South Fork Nooksack, will be compounded by increases in temperature. Temperature modeling indicates an increase in critical condition water temperatures in the South Fork by 3.5 to 6 degrees by the 2080s, depending on the scenario. More recent temperature modeling shows an increase in the duration of time that water temperatures will exceed 16 degrees centigrade, which is at the upper end of optimal temperature for salmon rearing. In the South Fork by 2025, that's where we are now almost, right? Modeling projects 78 days of temperatures exceeding that threshold in the South Fork. That's almost twice as long as that modeled for the mid 1990s. And by the latter part of the century, it's not as bad in the earlier part of the century because of that buffering effect of glacial melt, but towards the latter part of the century, we'll see a reduction in that glacial melt and a greater number of days exceeding what that temperature threshold in the North and Middle Forks. So in addition to the loss of soil protecting snowpack and increased intensity of precipitation events, will increase sediment delivery to streams. That, coupled with the increased magnitude and frequency of peak flow events, will likely lead to increased turbidity, bank erosion, and sediment flux. Of particular concern is glacial retreat. This animation here shows it's an animation from 1950 to the end of this century, showing glacial retreat up in the upper watershed. It's actually the estimated ice thickness. So glacial retreat is projected to expose at least 2 square kilometers of moraines, which will have the potential to erode, fail, and provide additional sediment to the stream channel. Impacts will be felt most by those species with salmon species with extended freshwater residence and especially summer migration and spawning. This chart shows the timing of different life stages of South Fork Nooksack early timed Chinook. Life stages are down here on the left, and across the top, these are months of the year, January, February, all the way to December. And so the bars show the months that they're those life stages are expected to be in the system. So overlaying the timing of increased winter peak flows, we would expect impacts to incubation, rearing, and outmigration. Salmon reds would be more likely to be scoured out and juveniles flushed downstream. The loss of spring snowmelt that reduces discharge could affect river entry, migration and holding, rearing, and outmigration. Lower spring flows in particular may reduce survival for juvenile fish migrating out to sea. Increased temperatures would affect most life stages, increasing the risk of disease and reducing growth. And then coupled with decreased summer low flows, that would affect migration and holding, spawning, incubation, and juveniles over summering in the system. We are, of course, already seeing indications of the impacts on our salmon populations. In 2021, there were 2 events that significantly affected Nooksack Chinook and other salmon. In summer of that year, in the South Fork, high temperatures and low flows, and coupled with a lack of sufficient holding habitat, led to a die-off of over 2,400 returning Chinook, many of them hatchery origin, before they could spawn. Dead fish are shown here in this photo as white sort of blobs in this pool. That number of over 2,400 fish comprised 72% of the Nooksack early Chinook that returned to the South Fork that year. Meanwhile, in November of that same year, an atmospheric river event led to flooding in the Nooksack River and Forks. In the upper main Sam Nooksack, it was a flood of record, a 100-year event that caused widespread flood damage, including damage to salmon habitat. Lummi staff estimate the number of juvenile Chinook leaving the Nooksack annually, and in 2022, their estimates are that after the 21 flood events, the number of wild Chinook out migrating was about 30% of the average, 7-year average. We focus so far on impacts to freshwater salmon habitats, but we also have sea level rise to contend with. This graph shows the projected increase in sea level rise. This is sea level rise along the y-axis, and these are the years across the x. This is increase in sea level at the Nooksack River Delta through 2080. There is a, and so these are different moderate and worst case emission scenario, and each of these are likelihood levels. This is 99% likelihood, so it's 99% likely that sea level rise will be in the 0.1 to at least in the 0.1 to 0.3 foot increase range by 2080. A 50% chance sea level rise will be in the 1.5 to 1.9 foot range, and a 99% chance 1% chance it'll be in the 4 to 4.7 foot range. So what can we do to mitigate these impacts to salmon? Well, different kinds of restoration strategies help mitigate different impacts. I'm going to show that in this matrix, and if you see green dots, that's a positive impact. Yellow, it depends, and black dot it means no impact. This is based on literature survey. So riparian restoration helps mitigate increases in temperature. It helps shading the stream. In-stream restoration can also help mitigate increases in temperature by increasing hyporheic exchange. That's the exchange of surface water with the kind of subsurface river, the hyporheic zone. Also by creating cold water refuges. Floodplain restoration has the potential to mitigate temperature, hydrology, and sediment impacts by improving base flows, attenuating flood flows, and storing sediment, as well as providing a diversity of habitats that increase salmon resilience to climate change. I'll also add that strategies typically associated with in-stream restoration, like the construction of log jams, are often used to help restore floodplain connectivity. So there's a bit of overlap between these. Stream flow restoration obviously can mitigate hydrology impacts depending on what specific actions are implemented, and that can in turn offset temperature impacts. And then finally, actions to restore fish passage increase salmon resilience by expanding the range of habitats available to fish and providing some refuge from sort of extreme events elsewhere.
So we'll now expand upon the restoration strategies that the tribes are using to adapt to climate change. And our overarching local vision of salmon recovery in the Nooksack Watershed is to return self-sustaining salmonid runs to harvestable levels through the restoration of healthy rivers, marine shorelines, and natural processes, through the use of hatcheries and also with responsible harvest. So I'll start with our work in the Nooksack estuary. The Lummi Reservation is a coastal community situated on a peninsula, which effectively becomes an island under flood conditions, not only impacting public health and infrastructure, but cultural and natural resources. And this is a photo taken on the reservation during that November 2021 flood event that Treva talked about. Climate change has worsened existing habitat conditions such as elevated bacteria levels, closing shellfish beds, and high water temperatures and low flows affecting Chinook harvest. So to adapt to these issues, estuarine restoration on the Lummi Reservation has focused on conservation, wetland enhancement, riparian plantings, improving fish passage and flood conveyance through replacing culverts and raising roads, levee setbacks, and beaver dam maintenance and beaver deceiver installations to maintain flow through sloughs. And we're also in the process of developing a coastal resilience strategy and project priority plan for the Lummi Reservation that will focus initial efforts on climate mitigation and adaptation on high priority items, such as flood risk reduction and reducing stressors to salmon, and to also further refine and prioritize climate mitigation and adaptation strategies for implementation. Another adaptation strategy highlighted is riparian plantings. Riparian plantings provide shade, helping to reduce water temperatures, as Treva mentioned earlier. Also, as trees mature, they can increase the stability of forested islands and associated side channel habitats within the river and provide a source of large wood to the river. And between Lummi and Nooksack, they've planted over 900 acres of native trees and shrubs in riparian areas along the Nooksack River forks and within the estuary. And given the need for immediate improvements in salmon abundance and productivity, our 2005 Salmon Recovery Plan prioritizes habitat restoration projects that provide a near-term benefit. So for that reason, construction of log jams to restore habitat conditions and processes is a key recovery strategy. These engineered log jams are modeled off of large wood, material once abundant in the river, and are consistent with habitat forming processes. Engineered log jams provide multiple habitat benefits, such as developing pools with woody cover and reduced temperatures, creating deep pools for holding and rearing salmonids, slowing the flow of the river to create hydraulic refuges and to direct flow into side channels and onto the floodplain, and supporting forested island creation. And log jams can be used to increase the amount of stable wood in the river, reducing channel instability, and to also promote spawning gravel deposition. So we have focused our work in the areas that are the highest priorities for habitat restoration, whether it's in the North Fork and Middle Fork, where Chinook are limited by high channel instability and low habitat diversity, or in the South Fork, where Chinook are limited by lack of deep complex pools, high temperatures, and low in-stream flows. Between 2001 and 2022, Lummi and Nooksack have constructed 542 log jams and restored 14.4 miles of river. And this figure shows the location of log jams constructed on the North, Middle, and South Forks.
Okay, moving on to floodplain restoration. So floodplain restoration involves removing or setting back riprap bank hardening and or levees, relocating infrastructure outside of erosion hazard zones, and constructing log jams to reconnect the river to its floodplain. This strategy benefits salmon by forming complex habitat, attenuating downstream flooding by storing floodwaters, and improving access to important flood refuge habitat. Obviously, reconnecting floodplains means more water on these floodplain areas during flood events, which can make this kind of restoration challenging in floodplains with development or active land use. Many of our floodplains, especially in the lower South Fork and lower Nooksack River, are actively farmed. We've worked with numerous landowners, including farmers, and many have been willing to allow access through their properties for river restoration, but removing riprap that protects their property or allowing for increased flooding can be a harder sell. Securing permission from FEMA and Whatcom County in these settings has also been challenging for us, requiring expensive and onerous work to update flood maps before we can implement our restoration projects. Lummi's restoration program has completed several restoration projects in less developed reaches of the watershed, such as the Upper South Fork and in the Middle Fork, that has incorporated floodplain reconnection. That's shown here in this photo from their Lummi's Middle Fork Nooksack Porter Creek Alluvial Fan Restoration Project. Even in more developed reaches like the lower South Fork, the tribes are working hard to reconnect floodplains where possible. However, working in such reaches requires integration of multiple objectives into project design to harmonize restoration with surrounding land use. The Nooksack Tribe is piloting this kind of integrated approach with our Fish Camp Integrated Flood and Fish Project in partnership with Whatcom County River and Flood. This project, it's located near Acme, includes almost 2.5 miles of priority river habitat for Chinook and other salmon. The town of Acme is also a repetitive flood loss community, and the other main objective is to reduce flood risk in the area. There's also a railroad that runs along the South Fork through the lower part of the reach. And early outreach to the railroad found them willing to support restoration, provided it could be done in such a way as to increase resilience of their railroad to climate change. And then finally, given the sheer number of potentially effective landowners in the reach, outreach has been a really important project component as well to engage the community in planning. to ensure transparency and build broad community support. So integrating these multiple objectives, flood risk reduction, salmon recovery, infrastructure resilience, building community support has expanded the footprint and scope of the project, encompassing more floodplain reconnection through removal of constraints, lowering levees, removing some bank hardening, as well as placing log jams in the channel to restore structure. So the project area is over 530 acres, and preliminary, and I'll add very conservative estimates of benefits. We're only to preliminary design for the project, but preliminary estimates are that we'll be able to restore channel migration to 7.7 acres of disconnected migration area and improve hydraulic connectivity to at least 110 acres of the floodplain. Both tribes are also excited to advance stream flow restoration, specifically restoring natural hydrology in wetlands, floodplains, and streams, an approach we sometimes refer to as natural storage restoration. These types of projects restore the natural ability of the land to store water longer and can contribute to higher stream flows in the June through October period when they're lowest. Types of projects include floodplain reconnection, wetland restoration, and beaver relocation, as well as beaver-inspired restoration, the placement of beaver dam analogs. We're still in the planning phase for this restoration strategy, to be honest, but preliminary estimates by a consultant working for Whatcom County indicate the introduction of beaver ponds over 20 stream miles could yield an increase of 2 to 16 CFS of in-stream flow benefit. That would be significant. Both tribes are also working hard to advance fish passage restoration across the watershed. We're doing that in a number of ways. Courts have ruled that treaties include an implied right to habitat protection. Those rulings led to a 2013 injunction that requires the state of Washington to fix fish passage barriers with greater than 200 meters of habitat gain. Western Washington Treaty Tribes initiated that legal proceeding, but tribal staff are working with the state on implementation, including reviewing project designs. Nooksack Tribe has led the initiative in partnership with Lummi Nation and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to establish agreements with Whatcom County and the City of Bellingham to inventory their own fish passage barriers and develop a schedule to fix them. And then finally, we're working with the BNSF Railway to identify and fix railroad barriers to fish passage. This photo shows one such barrier over Jones Creek, which is a tributary to the South Fork Nooksack River. The Nooksack Tribe partnered with BNSF to secure the funding to fix that barrier, and we hope to complete that project in 2025 or 2026. So while we work hard to implement projects to address both legacy and climate impacts to salmon and their habitats, we cannot forget the importance of preventing further degradation. Protecting treaty natural resources, including salmon and their habitats, is an important aspect of our tribal natural resource programs. For instance, both tribes participate in Whatcom County's integrated planning process to ensure that salmon recovery needs are incorporated into floodplain management. We also review land use proposals for impacts to treaty natural resources. Finally, another aspect of resource protection is advocating for sustainable land use. The Nooksack Tribe is a partner with Whatcom Land Trust, Whatcom County, and the Evergreen Land Trust in an initiative to adopt 6,000 acres of forest land on Stewart Mountain into local ownership. The partnership has developed several goals, but a primary goal is to implement forest management that restores watershed health, especially hydrologic processes. We've also been funding work to model the effects of forest management on hydrology. That project indicates that aggressive implementation of forest management strategies have the potential to offset some, although not all, of the projected decreases in summer stream flows in the South Fork with climate change. To conclude, we want to thank the numerous staff, both present and past, who've contributed to this work. For Nooksack, I'd like to acknowledge our restoration project managers and our restoration crew, as well as our resource protection, water resources, and fisheries staff who contributed to this work. I'll hand it over to Lummi to acknowledge Lummi staff, or hand it over to Kelley to acknowledge Lummi staff.
Thanks, Treva. And for Lummi, again, we have our project managers and our restoration staff, former restoration managers that are still helping out, seasonal technicians, other managers within the natural resources department that help us advance these projects and identify projects and needs, and then our director's office and tribal council staff as well.
And that's all we have.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions if there's time.
Yes, thank you so much, Treva and Kelley, for that great overview. I do have a couple of questions in the chat. Gary Rands asked, will adjudication have negative impacts upon rehab efforts?
Well, both tribes, both the Nooksack Tribe and Lummi Nation petitioned the state of Washington requesting adjudication. I've mentioned resource protection as an important, component of the work that we do. And adjudication is kind of we petitioned for adjudication to protect water resources. So there is a lot of concern and fear, and I recognize in the community that may affect landowner willingness in the short term, but we're really hopeful that ultimately it will help sort of impel and move forward the solutions, on the ground solutions that we all need to deal with limited water supply.
Thank you. We have another question from David Beatty, unless you wanted to add to that at all, Kelley. No, okay. David asks, for meeting recovery for early run Chinook, are you using the viable salmon population, VSP criteria set by NOAA's NIMPs of abundance, productivity, genetic diversity, and geographical distribution? It's a very technical question there.
Yep. Yeah, so we do use those for VSP or viable salmonid population parameters as indicators of population health. For communication, it's usually sort of more, it's easier to convey. People can, the numbers of fish that resonates with folks, but we also monitor population productivity. We actually have recovery goals for population productivity as well. Those were incorporated into our 2005 plan. We don't have quantitative goals for spatial structure and diversity, but we have sort of qualitative goals for those. So hope that answers your question, Dave.
Thank you. We've got another question from Phelps McIlvain. Phelps asks, are there any plans to install water retention strategies like those being used in Wyoming, Montana, and desert perimeter countries around the Sahara?
I'm not familiar with what specific kinds of water retention structures, but we, as I indicated, our plans to develop a programmatic approach to restore natural storage. One of the strategies to do that is to install or build beaver dam analogs that can sort of retain, hold up, dam up, and pond up streams to increase that storage. So both increasing the surface storage and then also infiltrating into the groundwater aquifers.
Phelps had a follow-on. Just depressions with seeds for plants to hold rainfall is, I think, is a short description of some water retention strategies. I think we have time for just one more question. Okay, James Carduni asks, what are the most significant challenges to restoration?
I can field this one, and then Treva, you can jump on. Thanks. You've been answering the other questions. So I think if I was to distill the most significant challenges, so as you can see, we have legacy impacts to habitat, and we're also dealing with climate change impacts. And so something we talk about a lot is how do we increase the pace and scale of restoration within our watershed. So how do we do bigger projects at a quicker pace? And both Treva and I manage our programs. We have very small teams. Our programs are 100% grant funded. So it will take several years to get the funding in place, to work with engineers, develop designs. Then we go and we get funding to implement the projects. And there's just never enough funding to go around to really do the work that we need to do at a significant enough scale. So I would probably say that funding is probably one of our number one challenges. I heard this great analogy at a salmon recovery conference multiple years back that talked about, I think to repaint I don't know if it was the Hood Canal Bridge, is like a $20 million infrastructure project. And that's about as much money that goes towards salmon recovery for the whole state of Washington for a year. And so if we think about restoring rivers at a meaningful level, as infrastructure projects, we kind of need that same level of funding. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. And then Treva, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'll add. I mean, I touched on some of the challenges. These are large and complex projects, and there are a number of challenges associated with sort of getting them from concept to, construction. We're always limited by landowner willingness, but we've created our excellent project managers have developed some great relationships with landowners, and we've seen that landowner willingness improve with time as neighbors see, that we really work closely with the landowners to make sure that we implement projects that don't make things worse for them, and some where we can sort of address their needs and such. To be honest, we're dealing with a sort of floodplain permitting challenge more recently. We take care to design these projects so as not to increase flood risk to adjacent landowners, but there are just particularities with connecting rivers to their floodplains wherever you have any kind of impact that may change the flood conditions in the adjacent floodplain, it creates this really, onerous process that involves having to update the flood maps, do a bunch of hydraulic modeling and update flood maps. And that process has proven really difficult to us in recent years. It's delayed construction of, our first project having to go through that, delayed construction for 2 years. We're hopeful we can go to construction this year, but it's a challenge. So our staff work really hard confronting and working through the challenges as they arise. And it's always something different. This happens to be, at this point, this is one of our biggest challenges, this floodplain permitting issue.
Thank you so much. We're going to need to transition at this point. I do see that another question is in the chat, and perhaps Treva or Kelley, you could answer that in the chat. But I do want to make sure that we have enough time to hear from Analiese. So I'm going to transition now and introduce her. Analiese Burns is the Habitat and Restoration Manager with the Natural Resources Division of the Bellingham Public Works Department. Analiese obtained a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Washington and a Master's in Environmental Studies from Western Washington University with an emphasis in environmental policy. She is also a certified professional wetland scientist and a LEED accredited professional. Analiese has over 25 years in the natural resources management arena and is passionate about watershed level solutions and strategic planning. She entered the public sector after working in the private sector, assisting clients with development and planning level projects throughout Western Washington. And in her spare time, she enjoys participating with local nonprofits and spending time with her family, exploring the trails and boating up and down the coast. Thank you, Analiese.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl, for that great introduction. And Kelley and Treva, that was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your presentation as well. Kelley and Treva and I work together closely. And it's always wonderful to see a summary of their work as well. So I'm, as Cheryl mentioned, I'm Analiese Burns. I'm the Habitat and Restoration Manager for the City of Bellingham, and I work in the Public Works Department in the Natural Resources Division. And As a representative of the City of Bellingham, it's important that we acknowledge the land of the City of Bellingham. The habitats within the area we call Bellingham today have been cared for by the peoples of the Lummi Nation and Nooksack Tribe since time immemorial. And the habitats of this region were much altered with European American settlement. And today, the remaining habitats are intermingled with urban areas. And as stewards, we're working toward maintaining existing habitats and restoring functions to the best of our ability. So my presentation will be a little bit of a counterpoint to Kelley and Treva's, in that we're going to concentrate on what does climate mean for salmon within an urban setting. First, it's probably worth mentioning that it's unusual for a city of the size of Bellingham to have a natural resources division. So I feel very fortunate to work for a city that has permanent staff that work on restoration and salmon recovery every single day. And that's not true of a lot of cities of our size. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Cheryl, does that work? You seeing that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So while we are in an urban area, we still do have habitats. And these habitats, first and foremost, we need to understand where they are, what condition they're in. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is the mapping and assessment portion of our work. And so our habitats, this is going to be mostly about salmon, but I do want to mention that, of course, we have wildlife habitats as well. So terrestrial habitat is important. We have gone through quite a recent exercise in mapping our wildlife habitat nodes, which means our most important wildlife habitat areas, and then the corridors that connect those areas. So we have work in 2021 that helps us prioritize where our urban wildlife habitat, terrestrial habitat is, and how to connect them. Of course, we also have aquatic habitats as well. We have 9 watersheds that are within the City of Bellingham. What's different than the Nooksack River, which is what Treva and Kelley were mentioning, is that the watersheds within the City of Bellingham are all lowland streams. So they're all fed with rainwater and groundwater. They don't have any snowmelt that is significant that feeds those streams. And of course, we have abundant wetlands. So this graphic shows the watersheds are the green boundaries. And you can see there's multiple of them that are within the city jurisdiction. The city jurisdiction is the gray boundary. And the wetlands are in purple. And the wetlands are primarily along the stream corridors and also in the marine shoreline. And a lot of questions come to me about, well, where are salmon within the City of Bellingham? And the answer is all of our streams are salmon-bearing streams in the City of Bellingham. So there's either resident salmon or salmon that migrate back and forth from the ocean. We call those anadromous, that are in all of our streams. So you may, some people are surprised to know that you can find coho and steelhead and chum, which are our most common salmon or salmon species that are in our streams. But occasionally we do see Chinook as well. Our marine shoreline is where the most important habitat for Chinook is located. So what are the limiting factors within our urban setting? They're very similar to the limiting factors or the problems for salmon that Treva and Kelley mentioned. And I have narrowed it down to the ones that are most relevant in an urban setting. So in an urban setting, one of the most important is access. So that just means the ability for a fish to be able to travel back and forth throughout the city streams. So if we have a barrier that prevents them from migrating or moving, that is one of the things that we need to address. It's probably one of our most common limiting factors in the city. We have estuarine habitat that has been lost. So we have about 250 acres of habitat that has been lost around Bellingham Bay. So returning some, restoring and creating new estuarine habitat is a high priority. As you know, we've probably, you know, that we've lost channel complexity. You know, when European settlement happened in our area, one of the first things they did was clear the land and ditch the streams for agriculture and for other transportation that was moving into our region, like railroads. And that just reduced the complexity of habitat. Those same type of actions also reduced floodplain habitat, so it disconnected the stream from its floodplain. It was problematic to have people living in farms in areas that flooded regularly, so people spent quite a bit of time trying to drain fields and drain areas where they wanted to build. We have lost pool quality and quantity. So within the streams, those deep areas that can have salmon rearing and living through the summer in the hot temperatures, we've lost some of that habitat. We have high temperatures in all of our city streams. So there is a state water quality standard that is primarily for salmon. And so we understand which of our streams doesn't meet that state water quality standard. And it's all three streams that are our largest streams. So Whatcom, Whatcom, and Paddon do not meet state water quality standards for temperature. And so we work a lot on that limiting factor. And then water quality, of course. And water quality can include temperature, but I've separated out for everyone to understand that we also know that turbidity or sediment in the stream and metals and other water quality impacts are also important to address. So when we talk about access, some of the tools that we use to figure out what to do, we have a prioritized list. We understand where our barriers are, our fish access barriers, and we have prioritized which ones are most important to address for fish. And I'm really proud to announce that we have, as of 2021, we have a new memorandum of agreement with the co-managers, which means the entities that manage fish in our region. So that's the Lummi Nation, the Nooksack Tribe, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to work with them on updating our inventory and updating our prioritization so that we are all in agreement as to what is the highest need, and also work together on getting funding and technical support for improving those barriers. For estuarine habitat, we have several tools. We understand how juvenile fish migrate through our systems, including along our shoreline by a study that was done. If anyone knows Eric Beamer, he was the lead on that study. We have a shoreline master program that identifies where our pocket estuaries are and where our habitats are that we have designated as natural, or a designation that understands that the habitat needs are the priority for our shoreline in those sections. And then we have a nearshore and estuarine prioritization that helps us understand where the restoration opportunities are and protection opportunities, and then prioritizes it for us so that we know where to spend our time and money. For the channel complexity, floodplain habitat, pool quality and quantity, temperature, and water quality, we have a document that we created. It was a technical assessment that really looked at the functional, how our habitats are functioning within the city, and then prioritizing which ones are functioning fairly well and we need to protect them, and which ones need some help. They need some restoration, but if we invested restoration, they would function at a somewhat sustainable and at a level that would have the underlying processes would be able to maintain habitats. So we understand that about our different sub-watersheds, and it helps us invest funds and time. And we also have a surface and stormwater comprehensive plan that also addresses fish passage. So when we talk about climate and how this interacts with what we already know about fish, where fish are, and what restoration needs to be done, the question is, what are the anticipated climate impacts to our urban streams and fish habitat? And it's very similar to what Treva and Kelley mentioned. The first thing we need to do is just analyze what potential change will there be, and the amount of that change and its timing. There are lots of uncertainty in this area based on the future rate of greenhouse gas emissions, our ability to sequester carbon, how the globe is going to respond. So there's a lot of question marks, but we're getting more and more clear on our predictions every single year. So I'll go through this quickly because Treva and Kelley did a great job going through some of their graphs. These are essentially the same graphs just for Bellingham specifically. So we have graphs that talk about what our projected average sea level rise might be in the city, just depending on the amount of probability you're looking at. The different colors are the probability. So the gray line is a 1% chance of exceeding current levels. So we've taken that work and we have created a map where we can put in the different parameters, what's the percentage possibility and also what's the greenhouse gas emissions projection that we want to use. And then we can graphically map where along our shoreline where we expected to have increased flooding. And for the most part, we're fairly lucky in the city of Bellingham. We have a pretty steep topography right at the shoreline. So there aren't a lot of vulnerable areas. The most vulnerable areas are kind of in the lower Fairhaven area by the ferry terminal and then all the port area along Roeder Avenue. And of course, we want to look at our streams and what increased precipitation is going to do to those streams. So what we do know is that, of course, we're going to have increased peak flows within our streams. So this was the 2021 November flood. This is the intersection of Squalicum Way and West Street. This is Squalicum Creek that has overtopped its banks and is essentially running down Squalicum Way, the road. We're going to have low flows. This is already a problem. So we're going to have lower flows within our streams. We're going to have temperature that's going to be exacerbated. So we already have a temperature problem. It's going to get hotter. And we're going to have sea level rise and wave action that increases our flooding along our shorelines beyond what we're already seeing. So what are we doing to adapt to those projected climate impacts? First, what we do know is that climate change will exacerbate existing limiting factors. Climate change will alter the habitat availability and suitability. And climate change will increase uncertainty and variability. So we adapt by providing additional suitable habitat. We address those limiting factors. How can we make our habitats more suitable? We make available habitat. So that it's addressing the access issue, trying to make more habitat available to fish and also build more habitat. And then we provide additional diversity. So trying to address access to different types of habitats and build more diversity of our habitats. This is just a quick picture of the type of restoration that we do, or I guess the quantity. We have over 60 different restoration sites that have been completed within the city of Bellingham. And that's I know you can't see everything, but the green fish and the green polygons are what's completed, and the yellow and orange are planned. So we do in-stream restoration. This is pre-construction in 2019 and then post-construction 2020 of the Squalicum Creek reroute, where we increased pools, diversity, cool water inputs into the stream, and increased groundwater connection to provide some temperature relief. We have floodplain reconnection. We have projects such as this one, which is Padden 24th to 30th project. Pre-construction is in 2021. It was straightened incised channel. And in 2023, we've reconnected some of that floodplain, built some wetlands that it can overflow into, and increased diversity of pools and riffles. We increase shading to address that temperature limiting factor. So this is Whatcom Creek, an aerial photograph near DuPont Street in 2004 to the left, with limited conifer cover and vegetation lacking on the south bank, which is the highest heat exposure, and another picture in 2016 with the trees that have grown up to try to provide some more shade. We do estuarine restoration to try to increase estuarine habitat availability. And in 2014, this is a picture of what Little Squalicum Park looked like with a lawn and a trail. And to the right is post-construction, and just last year where we opened up a new estuary, a 2.4 acre estuary to juvenile Chinook and other species that need places to go as they outmigrate out of the Nooksack River. And then we address fish passage. So barriers to fish. This is Paddon Creek daylighting, where we took a creek that was in a tunnel from the 1890s and daylighted it to provide fish access through the city of Bellingham, provide that migration so that the fish can get through our urban habitats and into habitats that are more suitable and in diverse locations. And then we expand habitat. So we take habitats like Whatcom Creek here and try to increase the available habitats off to the side. This is off-channel rearing habitat and oxbows on red-tailed reach. And finally, we look at our lakes and try to do some predictions of future climate change, how it's going to affect the water budgets of those lakes. And this is a picture of Lake Paddon. We're doing a water budget for Lake Paddon, and one is for Lake Whatcom as well. And finally, we do forest management. So the climate change strategies that we're using is looking for pest management and monitoring. This is emerald ash borer off to the left. We look at what seed sources we can use to have seeds that are climate adapted, but yet still native species, but securing the seed from a location that may be better adapted to climate change. We do fire risk management. And sometimes that includes forest thinning and trying to mature forest without exacerbating fire risk. And then we monitor species that are vulnerable, like Western red cedar. So here's a web page. If anyone is interested, you're welcome to look at our web page with lots of information and project pictures, cob.org/habitat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Analiese. I want to acknowledge that we are technically at time. I am wondering if Treva, Kelley, and Analiese, you are able to stay on for a few minutes longer so that we could field some more questions.
Yes, happy to, and sorry I ran over.
That's all right. It's hard when you have a lot of information. All right. Do folks have some questions? So I do have one question from David Beatty in the chat. He writes, he's writing about stormwater issues that are present within the city of Bellingham and not encountered to the same extent in the Nooksack Basin, if I'm following correctly. So his question is, how is the city of Bellingham addressing the issue of stormwater whose flows may be affected by climate change?
Yeah, so we have a stormwater comprehensive plan, and that has I think a whole chapter on it about predicted climate change effects on our stormwater system. So we're thinking about, what are the size of our pipes that need to carry water? Do we have flood risk or increased fish access problems? And so that is a component of our stormwater comprehensive plan and has been built into trying to understand what we need to prioritize for investment into our stormwater system. And our stormwater system, the funding for stormwater comes, if anyone lives in the city of Bellingham, you get a bill, and part of your water and stormwater bill does go toward those improvements as well as fish passage projects.
Do we have any other questions for Analiese? Either you can ask in the chat or raise your hand. I'll give us a moment to compose a question, and I would also take the opportunity to thank our team members who are here: Becky Peterson with Geneva Consulting, Rebecca Schlotterbeck with the Public Utility District Number 1, Stephanie Silencion with City of Bellingham. Have all been helpful this evening, helping to make sure everything runs smoothly. I did see a hand up. Brian Armstrong, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just curious, in the Cornwall Park area, and there's going to be a new roundabout around Meridian. And I know they're going to be cutting out Squalicum Parkway. and there's going to be a new bridge being built in Cornwall Park, and there's so many different projects that are going to be happening within the next few years. What is the plan going forward as far as restoring riparian habitat in that area? Because I feel like that's a huge opportunity with so many different things being built in that area.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We think the same thing. So whenever we do a capital project, we try to look for opportunities to maximize benefits. So you're absolutely right. That is a location that has multiple things going on. We've got a transportation network, but we've also got a stream network. So how can we combine the improvements that we're doing with the stream or with the roadway to also improve the stream? And we are going to be improving some fish barriers. The road right there is a fish barrier, as well as trying to maximize the riparian habitat, revegetate some of the buffer in the area of that roadway as well. And so it's a collaborative team effort. So I sit at those team meetings and try to provide some input and comments to the design.
Any other questions? Either for, David Beatty. So your hand pop up? Maybe
I
not.
have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
I address it to Treva and Kelley.
Okay, that would be fine.
Looking at the projections for 2030, 2050, 2080, and knowing what the costs are up to date in WIRA 1, what's the estimated cost going forward to get the Puget Sound Chinook ESU, which Nooksack's required to have recovery? What's the estimated cost going forward?
So Dave, are you asking about the estimated restoration costs
Yes.
to meet recovery goals?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I saw your question in the chat, and one thing that we've developed through the WIRA 1 salmon recovery update is we developed a 10-year implementation plan. So, the City of Bellingham, Nooksack, Lummi, Whatcom County, other partners in the watershed, we kind of put together our project list of what we're hoping to do to meet our habitat recovery goals. So we have habitat targets identified, numbers of pools in the South Fork, acres of riparian trees planted. And so we have a project list, we have a plan, we haven't put the numbers together. We've talked about it a lot that we would like to kind of estimate, and that would just be for the next 10 years, right? So I guess that would get us, to 2034. So we don't have definitive numbers at this point, but I think that's something we've all been talking about, what that would take.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll just add on to that, though, that I think that funding is a challenge. And Dave, just to get to your point, each of these projects is generally in the millions, and costs have been increasing dramatically in the last 5 years. And so what we thought was expensive 5 years ago is just becoming, it's surprising what it takes to do just a single project in millions.
Yeah, and the high cost, just to add to what Kelley and Analiese said, the high cost of these projects requires us to secure funding from numerous sources, which creates a problem in itself, managing multiple grants, different timelines, different reporting needs and such. So it's a puzzle, it's a challenge, but we've certainly been able to get a lot of work accomplished, and we're seeing the benefits of that as well. So hard work, but very rewarding.
It must certainly sharpen up prioritization of projects, knowing the costs.
I think we just have time for 2 more questions because I want to release our speakers to their evenings. Dory Belisle, I see that you have your hand up. Oh, you're muted still. There you go.
I have a question for Analiese. Do you feel the voice of the environment or the voice of our planet is being taken into consideration in the other departments? So like with growth management or when they're looking to expand the growth area, are they considering what kind of habitat destruction there's going to be, or does it have an equal voice with growth?
Yeah. I think that a lot has changed since I started 25 years ago. I don't think that it did have an equal voice. And one of the things that we've been working really hard on is articulating the environmental needs in a format that other people are used to seeing. And so we have transportation plans, we have a capital improvement plan that engineers use for transportation. So we have now created GIS layers and maps and tools that we can then communicate with the same type of language. And that has really served us well. And I think so that kind of using the same tools and talking the same language, that has happened in the last 20 years. The other thing that's happened is just a public support and a public outcry. And so one of the benefits of a city urban restoration project is you have a lot of eyes on it. And so those restoration projects build a tremendous amount of public support. And I think today, I would confidently say yes, the environmental needs are at the table at the same time as the other factors. It's just it's a complex balancing puzzle.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna voice Atul Deshmani's question, and that's going to be our final question for tonight. I do see that there's another one in the chat. If one or more of you are able to address Julia's question in the chat, that would be super. But Atul asks, how are all of you contributing to county and city comp plans? And he's specifically asking if there's one area that deserves more attention.
I can take a quick stab at that. Both the county and the city are updating their comp plans, as Atul is familiar with, it sounds like. So I have, I'm part of the city's team when they're updating comp plan. So as a staff member, I'm involved in the conversations of the chapters that are relevant to the environment, which is most of them. And then also there's an opportunity through the salmon recovery staff team to provide comments on the county comp plan as well. And so there has been many opportunities to provide some input on both plans, I believe. And one area that needs some attention is an exciting advancement, and that is that it is state mandated now to have a new climate change chapter to all comp plans. And so it is, we're learning by doing, trying to figure out how do you build a climate change chapter into the comp plan. And the county and the city are trying to figure that out themselves. There's some guidance from the state, but that's our one of the challenges this year.
Kelley or Treva, do either of you have any more to add to that?
Yeah, I was responding to a question in the chat, so forgive me if I'm redundant with what Analiese just said. But yeah, our local sort of technical salmon recovery staff team has reviewed the county's comp plan and provided comments from the environment chapter from the salmon recovery perspective. A lot of those comments focused around sort of managing growth in floodplains, because floodplains are obviously really important for, especially with increasing peak flows for flood storage. So that's one way. We do what we can. We have our hands full with our projects and our grants and all our other work, but we've recognized the importance of the comp plan, the county comp plan in particular, and carved out time to provide input on that. That helps.
Thank you so much to Treva and Kelley and Analiese for sharing your time and your expertise with us all this evening. And thank you to everyone who's joined on to this meeting to hear about this. Thanks for taking time out of your evening to hear about this important topic. Really appreciate it. And I do want to, and I'm seeing lots of gratitude in this chat. Thank you. Thanks to the presenters, great presentations. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I want to also respect everyone's time and release you all to the rest of the day. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you.